Blessings in the name of the Lord Jesus. Welcome to Paraclet TV, making disciples through the power of the Holy Spirit. Our intended learning outcome for this video or for this session, at the end of the session, 100% of the students with 100% level of proficiency will be able to first, to discuss concepts of the participants in the instrument of the study, and to apply the mechanics of formulating the participants and the instrument of the study. So based from the intended learning outcomes, this video will discuss about two important elements in the formulation or in the construction of your dissertation or thesis proposal, which are the participants of the study and the instrument of the study. So most often, in most universities, as well as in the different research organization, they have this major chapter or major division of the thesis or dissertation, which is called the research methodology. Now, research methodology is found in different universities and colleges. There are universities and colleges that put chapter 2 in chapter 2, the research methodology, but in some other formats like the Used Modern Language Association, they put it in chapter 3. But there is also, or there are also universities and colleges which they just put research methodology as a part of chapter 1, which is the problem. In an APA format, the research methodology is just the second major division of the research study, or whether it is a thesis or dissertation, that after the introduction, then you will have methodology or methods. Now, these are the common elements of research methodology in the thesis and in dissertation. The first one is called the research design. Then you have the research locale, the respondents of the study. Then you have the instrument of the study, the validation of and the establishment of reliability of the instrument. Then we have the statistical treatment. So in this video, we will just discuss the first three elements of the research methodology, which is called the research locale. Then we have the respondents of the study and the instrument of the study. I'm inviting you to watch another video or another video at Paraclet TV, which discusses the research design. There is a separate video for the discussion of the research design, but in this video, this is concentrated on the second and the third and the fourth elements of the research methodology. So let us start now with the discussion of that element of the research methodology, which is called the participants of the study. And that the participants of the study have the following important concepts that you must understand in order for you to formulate this element accurately. The first word that you must understand is called the population, and it is defined as a complete set of persons or objects that possess some common characteristics that are of interest to the researcher. So the population is the total number, or the total objects, or the total persons or organizations that are included in your thesis or the study. The population can be your respondents. They can also be your participants. And when we are looking at the numerical data for the population is divided into two kinds. We have the target population and the accessible population. So what is the difference between target population and the accessible population? Say, for example, your population that you're going to include in your study are the secondary school teachers. The target population, of course, are the secondary school teachers. And when we speak about target population, the secondary school teachers, and when our locale is only in the Philippines, so there are many hundred thousands of secondary school teachers that we are referring to. But because your study is just in one locale, say for example, you will be studying in just one division, so the accessible population, of course, is in your divisions. How many are the elements of the population? The target population, if it's of course, is bigger in its number as compared to accessible population. Say, for example, the total population of secondary school teachers in the entire Philippines is about 200,000. So the accessible population is dependent upon how many are the secondary school teachers in your district or in your division. So of course, it is lower than the target population. And when we speak about how many, we are referring to the numerical data of the entire population. And when we say there are 200,000 secondary school teachers in the entire Philippines, the 200,000 is called the parameter. So the parameter is defined as the numeric characteristic of the population. That's the numeric characteristics. And we have also another term that you have to remember and comprehend. We have the so-called sample. Sample is the subset of the entire population which serves as the respondents of the study. So when we say sample, these are the people that you have actually included in your study, because the so-called target population is too big. It will be not feasible in your study because you will be spending too much effort and too much financial concerns. So you will just have a sample of the entire population. So usually in the SWS survey, they just have 1,200 samples of the entire 60 to 70 million official voters of the entire Philippines. So that is so small as compared to the entire or to the target population. Can also have another term which is called statistic. This is now the numeric characteristic of a sample. So this answers the question, how many are your samples? So 1,200, the number is called statistic. Parameter is to population, while statistic is to sample. So we have another term which is called element. So the element is a single member of the sample. A single element with the sample or a single element of the population, the single member is called an element. Then there are, of course, another consideration in the sampling, or how many will be included in your study. And there are factors to consider: the size of the sample, so that the size of the sample will be accepted as your participants of the study. And these are now the some factors to consider in sample sizing. The first one is the homogeneity of the population. This means that the degree of the homogeneity is negatively related to the sample size. The more homogeneous are the elements of the population, you can have a smaller sample size. The more homogeneous are the characteristics of the sample, you can have a smaller sample size. That is the meaning of homogeneity of the population. The second factor to consider is the degree of precision desired by the researcher. So if you want to have 100% precision or 100% accuracy of the result of your study, this means that the sample size is positively related to the precision or accuracy of result. Meaning, the bigger number of sample, the bigger statistic of the sample, the higher is the precision or the higher percentage of precision or accuracy of results. The more, the better in terms of accuracy of results. And the third one is the types of sampling procedures. And when we speak about the types of sampling procedures, there are, of course, two major types. We have the probability sampling, which is also termed as the scientific sampling, and we have also the non-probability sampling. And the types of sampling procedure as a factor, probability sampling utilizes a smaller sample size than non-probability sampling. So these are now the three factors in sample sizing. You remember this one when you decide how many will be the statistics of your sample. So we have the homogeneity of the population, you have the degree of precision desired by the researcher, and the types of sampling procedure. Now, there are ways how to determine the sample size. So the question of how many will be the statistics of my sample is determined by means of the following. The first one, when your sample size is 30, according to Schott in 1990, it is already generally adequate to ensure that the sampling distribution of the mean will approximate the normal curve. So in statistics, 30 statistics or 30 elements of the sample is already acceptable when you use statistics in the treatment of your data, because in the group statistics, 30 is already acceptable small number of elements in the sample size. Next, when your population, or when we speak about the target population, is equal or less than 100, you can make all of them as your sample size. So meaning the P is equivalent to S. The parameter is equivalent to the statistics when the entire population is only equal or less than 100 parameter. Yeah. Okay. So we call this in statistics as universal sampling. You include all the elements of the population as your statistics in your sample size. The third way of determining the sample size is by using the Sloven's formula. And we all know that it was taught in Statistic 101 that it is used to compute the sample size using the formula. And this is the formula which you already familiar with, where N is equivalent to the sample size, bigger N is the population size or the parameter, and the E, of course, is the desired margin of error. So there are, of course, many researchers that utilize the Sloven's formula. Another formula or another way of determining the sample size, according to an expert, Togay, in 1976, the following are the acceptable sizes for different types of research. When you want to do a descriptive research, 10 to 20% may be required as your sample size, depending upon how many is the parameter of your population. When you do correlational research, 30 subjects or respondents are already acceptable in your research as your research participants. Then when you do a comparative research, when you are comparing male to female, you are comparing one institution to another institution, you can have at least 15 subjects or 15 respondents per group in a comparative research. And the same when you do an experimental research or you use an experimental design in your research, 15 to 30 subject per group, your experimental group, your control group will be acceptable at least 15 to 30 elements per sample. Okay? So these are the way of determining the sample size. You can use any of them. Sample size is 30 when you use statistic. When your population, when the parameter is less than or equal to 100, you can use all of them using universal sample as the statistics of your sample size. Then you can also use the Slovin's formula. And then according to Gade, this can be an acceptable guidelines in the number or in the statistics of your sample, depending upon what kind of research are you going to push through. Now, there are kinds of sampling according to Beck 2004. And these are the two major kinds of sampling, as I already mentioned in my previous discussion. We have the probability sampling, and we have also the non-probability sampling. The probability sampling is also termed as scientific sampling, as every element of the population is given an equal chance to be considered as an element of the sample. While in a non-probability sampling, you are not giving equal chances to all the elements of the population to be considered as a member or as a participant of the sample. In the probability sampling, there are different types. We have the simple random sampling, the stratified random sampling, you have the cluster sampling, and you have also the systematic sampling. So in a simple random sampling, all you have to do as an example is you must have all the names of the elements in a in the list, and you can choose from the list every 5 or every third. That is an example of simple random sampling. Or you can also put all the elements in a bowl, and all you have to do is to pick the acceptable statistic of the sample. Say, for example, you need only 30, and there are about 200 as your target population. So that 20 lots will be put in a bowl, and all you have to do is to draw 30 out of it. That is an example of simple random sampling. Next, you have the stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling is a different level. There are levels of sampling that you're going to do. Say, for example, there is already a bigger parameter of the population, say, for example, thousands. So you can have stratified random sampling. So say, for example, in the first sampling or in the first draw, you get about 1,000, but you are just targeting about 20%. Say, for example, the 20% is about 200. So out of the 1,000, you can have the second level. Out of the 1,000, you can get and draw about 500 elements out of that. And out of the 500 elements, you can again use you can finally get the 200 stratified 200 elements, which will be the number of participants as your sample size. We call that as stratified random sampling. There are stages that you have to observe. Now, in a cluster sampling, say, for example, what the SWS is using in the number of participants to look into who will be the president that they are going to vote. So there are clusters. Say, for example, the first cluster is Visayas. Then we have the second cluster, Mindanao. And the third cluster is Luzon. So all they have to do is to get 400 from the cluster from Luzon, 400 from Visayas, and 400 also from the from Luzon, and this we call as cluster sampling. In a systematic sampling, you can use different system so that you can establish the objectivity of selecting the elements for your sample. Systematic sampling, you can use different systems. Say, for example, you can use the computer to finally choose the number of the elements for your sample. You can also use paper and pencil. You can also use the bowl. You can also use, say, for example, the another technique which you think will give equal chances to all the elements of the population to be considered as the element for your sample size. You can establish any system provided that that system will give equal chances to all the elements of the population to be considered as the finally the elements of the sample. While in the non-probability sampling, as I discussed, that you are not giving equal chances to all the elements of the population, there are also kinds. We have the convenience sampling. This is also termed that accidental or incidental sampling. Statistic of your sample, all you have to do is to bring your questionnaire to a marketplace, and then you just give the questionnaire to all the people whom you will be meeting while you are in the marketplace. So say, for example, in the university, those who are present during the day that you visit them, then you give the questionnaire or your instrument. We call that as convenience sampling. Then we have also the quota sampling. So it depends upon how many is your quota. Say, for example, your quota is 50. The first 50 that you will be meeting, or that you will be calling, or that you will be finding in the social media after you have reached your quota. So that is called non-probability sampling. And then the 2.3, or the third type of non-probability sampling, is purposive sampling. So it depends upon your purpose. Usually in a qualitative research, we usually do a purposive sampling. It depends upon the purpose of your research. Say, for example, you are dealing with students who are encountering problems, and they get failing grades. So all you have to do is to look for the students who have failing grades during the term, and they can be as an element of your sample. So it depends upon your purpose. So these are the types or the kinds of sampling that you have to include. We have the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. So after we have already discussed about the participants of the study, we have now the data collection procedures. The most commonly data collection techniques are the following. We have the documentary analysis as number one. So the documents that are available, say, for example, in the library, when you are conducting historical research, there are documents available, say, for example, in the municipal hall, in the churches, in different churches, there are documents there. All you have to do is to get the documents and analyze the data within the documents. This is very important and most commonly used data collection techniques when you do a historical research in a qualitative research. But also, you can also use this when you want to describe or to a descriptive research in your method is documentary analysis. So in, say, for example, you are looking into the performance level of students during the synchronous in a synchronous class. So all you have to do is to get the permanent record or the class record or the cards, and then look at the data. That is called documentary analysis. Another way of collecting data, popular one, which is called the interview. So the interview is a very useful and effective method of gathering data, since you most of the time when you use this, you are when you will be the one to be the interviewer, you are having a face-to-face conversation with your interviewee as your sample. And in the interview, you can use a structured interview or the semi-structured interview or the unstructured interview. So what's the difference between the three types of interview? Say, for example, most commonly, our examples are the popular host in the television or in the social media because of their experience of conducting interview to different persons. They have no more cards or cue cards where they will be reading because they are used to it. We call that as unstructured interview. So the questions as well as the probe questions or the follow-up questions are just spontaneously coming out of the interviewer because they're already expert. We call that as unstructured interview. Now, the structured interview, all the questions as well as the follow-up questions are written down in an interview guide or the interview schedule. We call it as interview schedule. The interview schedule is a piece of paper or a document wherein all the major and the probe questions are written. And these documents are large, or these forms are largely used by the first time interviewer. If you are not experienced to conduct interview and you want to do it right, so you have to prepare an interview schedule wherein all the questions are written there. We call it as structured interview. Now, there are times that that you are already have a minimum experience of conducting interview, and then you can use the third one, which is called semi-structured. In a semi-structured schedule, only the major questions are written there. And then based from the answers of the interviewee, you can have a follow-up question. And those questions are just spontaneously pop up in the minds of the interviewer, and you call that a semi-structured interview. So an interview is very largely used when you do a qualitative research. And although it is very difficult because you're going to transcribe all the accounts that you will be receiving during the conduct of the interview. The third type in the data collection technique is called the observation technique. And here it is written, the consideration that you have to remember when you do an observation technique, the focus of the observation, the concealment, the condition wherein the subject of the observation has no knowledge of that he is being observed, duration, and the methods of recording the observation. So these are important things that you have to prepare when you do an observation. Usually, in a classroom, the supervisor of the principal conduct an observation, but the observation can be announced or unannounced. In order for you to have a very good result of the observation, it should not be announced. So meaning the participant or the subject or even the respondents of your study are not aware that they are being observed. There are also types of observation. We call this an observation guide, can be structured when all the indicators or the items are written there, which you are going to check. The checklist can also be, but in a structured interview, which the experts are using. Say, for example, you are a psychiatrist or you are already have degrees and postdoctoral degrees in your field. You can do an observation which is unstructured because you have already experienced to do it. Then we have physiological measures in which can be used to collect data. And physiological measures, say for example, the weight, the height. You can use other devices to get the data, especially when you are in a nursing course or a medical course and you are looking into the pulse rate, you are looking into the BP of the patients, then we call that as physiological measures. You can also use the meter stick. You can also use the ruler to give you the following measures. Then we have psychological tests. There are many tests that can be used to assess the personality of the person, or how friendly the the participant is, or what is the level of the self-esteem. There are available standardized instruments that were already used by experts in assessing or in measuring the personality trait of an individual. Standardized test. But you, of course, you have to get the permit of the owner of the psychological test. A psychiatric test is also another way of collecting data, because a psychiatric test is needed for those who want to be promoted as managers in the different field. Then the most commonly used of all the data collection techniques is called the questionnaire. Now, according to Nieswe Adowi, in 2002, there are good data collection instrument characteristics. How are we going to consider an instrument or a questionnaire that is effective in gathering the data? And these are now the things that you have to remember. The first one is okay. The questionnaire must be concise, no, concise, short, no, yet able to elicit the needed data. And according to Shirley in 1984, in your dissertation or thesis, the length of the questionnaire must be 2 to 4 pages, and allowable time of answering the questionnaire is about 10 minutes, and the length of its question is less than 20 words. So you have to remember this. These are technical guide for you in the formulation of your questionnaire. The shorter the indicators, the better it will be understood by the respondents, and they will easily do it in a shorter period of time. So according to Shelley, the length is 2 to 4 pages. The time to answer is 10 minutes. And the length of its question is less than 20 words. Then it seeks information which cannot be obtained from other sources. So if there are no available sources wherein you can solicit the answers to the different questions that you have in your thesis, you can formulate an instrument. These instruments must seek information that cannot be obtained from other sources. Then questions must be arranged and sequenced. So it is most commonly sequence that is followed by scholars is you begin with a simple question going to a more complex. But in research, in a questionnaire in research, your statement of the problem, how you did arrange your questions in the statement of the problem, is the guide how you are going to arrange the questions in your, of course, in your instrument in sequence. Your level 1, of course, I have already taught you that there are levels of question and stating specific questions. You have level 1, the factor isolating, level 2, the factor relating, then level 3, the situation relating, and number 4, which is the highest, which is the situation producing. So in the same manner, how you arrange it in the statement of the problem, you follow that in the making or in the draft or in the formulation of your survey questionnaire. It must be arranged according to the posted questions, and it should pass validity and reliability. So in our next lesson or in the next video that I will be doing, I will teach you how to make your questionnaire satisfy the index of validity as well as the index of reliability. To you, the commonly used scales when you do a questionnaire as your instrument to collect the data. We have the commonly used Likert scale, and this is an example of how you're going to do a Likert scaling. So the use of condoms, which is an item or an indicator, shows care for the partner. So you have a four graduation or four measures of the Likert scale. You has the strongly agreeable, disagree, and the strongly disagree. That is an example of a Likert scale. And another use or scale in a questionnaire, we call this a semantic differential scale. And this is different. So in this example, you have two concepts in an opposite ends. We have competent and incompetent. So you have a positive and negative one. So the competent, of course, all the respondents will encircle what is the level of competence of the subject. Say, for example, the subject is the principal and your respondents is the teacher. So the teacher as your respondents will just level the competence of the principal. So say, for example, the principal is so competent, you can encircle 5, you can encircle 4. Or if the principal is not that competent because he is new, so 1 or level 2 can be encircled. This is an example of semantic differential scale. So these are commonly used scales in the formulation of a questionnaire, survey questionnaire. So another example, punctual. Okay, this is now, I just want to give you an example of a questionnaire that can be a template or that can be a pattern in your questionnaire that you're going to propose in your study. So this is my questionnaire used during my doctoral degree. So you have the school or the college or the university where you are enrolled in the conduct of your thesis and dissertation, the Philippine Normal University, and then the problem title, Human Relation Intervention for School Managers Towards School Effectiveness. So there is a title, Questionnaire for Secondary School Teachers. Then the data, personal data, you can have it as your major variable 1, personal data. Direction, please provide pertinent information to the items below by checking the appropriate blanks and or by supplying the answer on the blanks. So usually one of the observable ethics, anonymity or no names department. So the name is optional, but then the school where the secondary school teacher is employed, so it must be placed there. So these are now the sub-variable for the personal data. You have position, the age, educational attainment. So we call this as the closed type of question wherein your participant will just check. So they don't have to think of the answers. All they have to do is to check. So in the position, you have the MT1, Master Teacher 1, Master Teacher 2, so on and so forth. Age 20 and below, 21 to 25. Educational attainment, you have the same type. Now, in the second major variable, which is the intrapersonal and interpersonal competency, you have now the direction. Indicate the degree to which you think the following statements or indicators are true or false. In assessing your principal and his teacher's interpersonal competencies, check the appropriate column. So very important that you must have a very clear direction for your respondents to answer it properly. So you have the Likert scale to use, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but you have to define the numerical value of the Likert scale so that your respondents will be guided properly. So when your respondents is going to rate 5, it means that the indicator is completely true to yourself. When we say completely true to yourself, there is a numerical value to make it more objective. So 81% to 100% true about your principal. Generally true, 61 to 80% true. 3, moderately true, 41 to 60% true. So it is better to define the Likert scale so that everything has a basis and making your instrument objective. Okay, so this is just the direction of the assessment of interpersonal. But in the second page, you will see the interpersonal and interpersonal competencies are major variables. And yun. Okay. And in the second page, you are now going to have this type. So the intrapersonal competency is the so-called major variable, and under interpersonal competency, you have the sub-variable. So letter A, the locus of control is the sub-variable. Letter B is the Machiavellian aspect of the personality of the principal. And 1 to 10 are the indicators for your sub-variable locus of control. And another 1 to 10 will be the indicators for your second sub-variable, which is called Machiavellian. So there is already a question, how is the locus of control of your principal and head teacher? So these are now the indicators, and here are now the columns wherein your respondents will answer. They will just check the column satisfying the convenience of answering it in not less than 10 minutes to answer. So these are examples that you have to follow in making your own questionnaire, survey questionnaire as the instrument of collecting the data. Okay? Share Jesus.
Subscribe and
Subscribe and
share
share
Paraclet
Paraclet TV.
TV.
Go, go, go.